Southern Ocean is the second most difficult place in the planet. The most difficult place is any city with people in it.
What is your contact with the world during your trip? Was it only your blog? Or was it telephone calls your parents? Or no? How did you really miss communication?
Sir, when I started off, before that, I'll tell you that I had a satellite system with internet and telephone, 24 hours connected. So whenever I wanted, I could text somebody, I could call up anybody. When I started off, I thought it was my duty to write about my experience because, taxpayer is paying for it and they should know what is happening. They get some information and all that. I used to take a lot of pictures. I used to write 2 blogs every week. I used to post pictures on Facebook, and I had a YouTube channel where I used to put videos. And I used to get 1 phone call every day from Naval Headquarters. I used to send them 2 reports every day. So one day I asked them, "Are you not getting my reports?" So this guy says, "Sir, we got your report, but we just wanted to confirm." And I blasted him. I said, "I am coming here to experience solitude. And you want to spoil it with phone calls?"
So,
Thankfully, they got my point and they did not, press with the phone calls. I did not call anybody, sir. I did not call anybody throughout that 5-month voyage, except when I was rounding Cape Horn. And one day before that, the CNC called me and he asked me if I'd spoken to my parents. I said no. So he's like, "What's wrong with you? Why can't you speak to your parents? You give them a call tomorrow." 26th of January, I called my parents. It was their wedding anniversary. Happened to be a wedding anniversary. I was at Cape Horn. I hoisted the national flag and I called Admiral Lavati, who was the godfather, Captain Donde and Ratnakar Dandekar, who had built the boat. This is the only phone call I made from the boat. But over a period of time, I wanted to have less and less contact with people. And in fact, it reached such a stage that I just stopped blogging. I stopped updating Facebook and all. And there was a huge backlash. People who are following, there was a huge backlash from them. And then I was forced to restart all these things.
Oh, okay. No, so from all this, did your views change, on land, change, with your long days away in the oceans?
Of course.
How did you look at the land again?
Of course, after spending 2 months at sea, I realized I was not telling a lie. I did not have an opinion of anybody else. More importantly, I was not wondering what somebody else is thinking about me. I could wear whatever I wanted to wear. I could eat what I wanted to eat when I wanted to eat. I could, it was total freedom. And after another month, I realized that people on land are experiencing a mass hallucination. They are believing in things that don't exist. They give value to things that get value because of their belief. For example, money. Money gets value because everybody is, believing in it. I realized people are kind of running after the wrong things. I realized that, things like guilt are used to control people. So this is a big change, big realization that happened to me when I was at sea. When I came back, it was like, when I used to see people interact with each other, it is like watching a movie where they're having a very animated discussion. And I'm sitting back and enjoying because I don't have to get involved in it.
Finally, when you came back, I was there when you went, and I was there. I flew down to Bombay to see you coming in, and I saw you running up to the president at the Gateway of India, and with the president himself being there and acknowledging your great achievement, it is a big thing. You have become a celebrity. So was your mind already, as you were running towards him, already thinking of the next big thing?
I was already thinking about it when I rounded New Zealand. So there were 2 things that were coming to my mind and I was slowly finalizing things. But the biggest problem of this, doing the circumnavigation, I'm telling this for anybody who wants to do a circumnavigation, is when you come back, you've been silent for 5 months and people expect a speech from you. I had to give a speech, and the audience was none other than the President of India, the Governor of Maharashtra, the Navy Chief, and people like that. I couldn't slip up. but I had forgotten how to talk. Anyway, I made some speech. I thanked a lot of people, and I did not know how to end it. So I looked towards the president and I asked him, "Sir, can I go for one more round, please?" everybody laughed just like you, but I was being serious.
If I remember correctly, the audience didn't hear that, and I think Admiral Sinha or somebody moved to the mic and I think repeated it. That Commander Abdullah just said, he wants to go around the world again, or the president himself said it. Something like that I remember, because then we all laughed when we heard it later as a retransmission. How different was your preparation for the next thing? Now, this is a very happy story. You went around and did a great thing, and how different was your preparation for the Golden Globe race now? Because that's a different cup of tea, I suppose. And what knowledge did you require for this that you had not already got?
So Golden Globe race was a complete paradigm shift from the first circumnavigation. The first circumnavigation was on a 56-foot boat. Technology, at least the electronics, was brand new technology. Push button sailing. You push a button, the boat will go right or left, 5 degree, 10 degree, or whatever. Anytime you want to know where you are, just look at the screen and with 2 or 3 meter accuracy where exactly in which part of the world you are. But obviously the weather and all threw challenges and all that. Now 56 foot is a pretty big boat. It's a very safe boat, and it is 23 tons. It's a very solid and heavy boat. Golden Globe race is a paradigm shift. What's happened in the last, say, 1969 was when the first non-stop circumnavigation of the Earth happened. It was Sir Robin Knox-Johnson who did it. In the next, say, 50 years, the technology kept going up so much that these days, if you want to race around the world, you need at least 60 crore rupees or something. That is the cost of a boat and the team and the expertise, and the boat is complete carbon fiber. The steering wheel is carbon fiber. Your toilet is also carbon fiber, and it's very expensive. So there is this guy who decided to revive the race of 1968-69. It was called the Golden Globe race. He decided to revive that race, and to revive that race, he said no technology that did not exist in 1968 can be used. So no GPS, no electronic watches, no satellite phones, no nothing. In fact, it is like, that NDA question, can I? And the answer is no.
No.
And you say, no. Yeah, and you say, but I didn't ask you. He said, don't ask. The answer is still a no. So it is going back in technology. That is obviously painful and difficult. But also you have to race with boats that are just 32 to 36 foot. That is half the size in length of, say, Madai, and 1/4 the size in weight. Very small, light boats, classic boats, very slow-moving boats. So these were the two challenges. Obviously, the biggest challenge was finding money for it, which I eventually somehow did. I built a boat in India, took her for the race and all that. But at the same time, I had to refresh my celestial navigation. There is no GPS, there is no push-button sailing. Navigating with the help of stars and sun is an art in itself. It took me almost 6 months of preparation to get it accurate. No quartz watches, so I had to go with those Chaviwala watches. Watches had to be accurate. If the watch goes off by 1 second, your position can shift by 1 mile. It can go wrong by 1 mile. If your watch is off by 1 minute, your position is off by 60 miles. That is the distance, from probably Goa to Karwar or something. So I had to work around all these inaccuracies. I had to figure out how to get time from land when you're at sea. Now, one thing I realized is that all radio stations broadcast time. BBC Radio broadcasts a sound signal, beep, 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 beep. This is BBC Radio on the hour, every hour. And that's a very accurate, transmission of time. I thought All India Radio also must be doing it. And I listened to All India Radio for, at least 2 hours. And suddenly somebody came up and said, this is approximately 7:26 in the evening and we are on All India Radio. And I needed accuracy up to the second. But fact is, technically, I had to really relearn meteorology and a lot of these subjects to go for the race. Navigation, meteorology, medicine, I had to pay extra attention. I had to do a 10-day course where I learned how to suture myself, stitch myself up if there's a cut, insert a catheter if I needed to, even use a defibrillator, all these things.
And use a defibrillator yourself.
No, you can't do that. But they taught me how to do it. This is one interesting thing. You go to, I went for training to a doctor. I said, listen, I'm sailing alone from this place to this place. So give me some gyan on medicine. So the doctor said, okay, come after 2 days. I went after 2 days and she started flashing a slide. The first slide is, if there is a problem, check if the patient is dead or alive. I said, I'll be alone. And she says, no, but this is how you begin. So even I think medical science is not prepared to handle solo sailors.
I remember you very casually saying that Golden Globe race is very nice, and some 3 people went mad and some 4 people committed suicide, and can this
That first story is very interesting. 1967, Chichester went around the world with one stop. By then, competition was heating up to figure out who will be the first guy to do it non-stop. There were people in UK who were, held back by courts. They were prevented from going to sea for this race because the courts thought these guys were going mad. Eventually, 9 people entered the race. There was a guy called Donald Travers, born in India. He got some sponsorship, built a boat, tried to sail around the world in this race. Halfway through, he realized that he can't go into the Southern Ocean with this boat, so he decided to send fake position reports. One day he realized he couldn't stand his own lies, so he jumped out of the boat and committed suicide. That is what the story says. French sailor Morticia, very experienced guy, a celebrity sailor in France. He was faster than anybody else. He started from England, crossed North Atlantic, South Atlantic, went into the Indian Ocean, Pacific. He was back in the South Atlantic. He just had to go up and finish. Informally, the highest French civilian award was declared for him. The French Navy was going to UK to escort him back to France. He was already a celebrity. At this point, he asked himself a question: what am I getting out of this? And his answer was, I get money, I get fame. His next question was, do I need these things? And his answer was no. So he decided to go around the world once again. And he settled down in Tahiti. He never came back. There was one guy, Tetley, who was leading the race. He was just 1,000 miles to finish when he came to know that a guy called Donald Travers was catching up. Obviously, Donald Travers was sending fake position reports. So he came to know that Donald Travers was catching up. He pushed his boat hard. His boat broke and sank. He was rescued. 1972, 3 years later, he committed suicide. I don't know why. The only guy who finished was Sir Robin Knox Johnson. His boat was built in India. He wanted to sail from India to UK. He told his wife that we will take our daughter, 9-month-old daughter, and sail to India. Wife promptly gave him a divorce. He conscripted his brother. They sailed all the way up to UK. He wanted to sell his boat, get some sponsorship, but that did not happen. He didn't get any sponsorship. So he decided to go in that boat only. The only thing he got by way of sponsorship was a case of beer and some chocolates. Now, he was the most unlikely guy to finish the race. He finished, won. He took 312 days to finish the race, won the race, got 5,000 pounds. He gifted that 5,000 pounds to the widow of Donald Travers. Now, there's an interesting story around this 312 days that he took. I built a replica of Robin's boat. I took the boat to UK. Robin came on the boat. And since it was a replica, he asked me, how long do you think you're going to take to finish this race? I said 311 days. One day less. He says, you are young and ambitious. I said, sir, you are old and jealous.
Though it's a very traumatic incident, but it's very famous also. Your final, that the accident that happened. I've heard you describing it to several people. How's that feeling when you had to, abandon the race, and there you were stuck some 6,000 kilometers from India and 4,000 each from Australia and South Africa. What a terrible place to stay getting stuck and waiting for a rescue. How do you think handle it at that time?
Sir, it was not a terrible place for me. It was a terrible place for all those who are coming to rescue me. I'm sure they would have prayed, this guy should have had this accident close to India. But fact is, I was not lost. I was not disturbed. I was not depressed or anything. The pressure of racing was off my head. Now all I had to do was lie down and expect somebody else to come and pick me up. So I didn't have to do anything. I had a good 3.5 days where I could, decide on what course to take in life. And I immediately started thinking of the next race, what board to buy.
And you were lying there, unable to move, I suppose.
Unable to move. My spine was totally gone. Legs were paralyzed, more or less. They couldn't take my weight. I couldn't stand and cook, so I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't stand and pump water, so I couldn't drink water. I had some cans of iced tea with me, and I was drinking it. But the only problem was because of some nerve issue, I was continuously vomiting. So I'll have iced tea, vomit, sleep for some time, then have iced tea, vomit, sleep for some time, and this kept repeating for almost 3.5, 4 days. But I had a lot of time. It was only when I came back that I realized how badly stressed everybody else was. And I remembered my CEO's words, Commodore Chandrasekhar Azad. He was CEO of Delhi. Once he called me and said, "Beta, tension lene ka nahi. Never take stress. Give stress. Tension lene ka." I made it a point to use it wherever I could.
I can completely imagine that. He was our training officer in NDA when we were cadets, and Lieutenant Chandrasekhar Azad was everything that you just said. I remember that the rough details as to you were about to lose your mask and you went to the tip of it, and when it righted, you fell down 9 meters. And what exactly happened? Very briefly.
So it was a very bad storm. The problem was not the wind itself, but the speed at which the entire storm was moving. So we had 2 trains of waves, almost 15-20 meters high, which are clashing from 2 directions. Now, when wave height exceeds a certain height, you have to adjust the angle of the boat to the wave so that it is kept safe. But with 2 trains clashing, it was they are conditions which are ripe for the worst kind of sea state you can imagine. In similar conditions of New Zealand, 25-meter waves were recorded. So this is what happened that day, and the boat is so small that the waves could tip it, and it just went upside down and it would come back. So in one of those knockdowns, I was outside the boat. The boat was knocked down. It went like that. I held the mast, slipped out of the mast, and I reached the tip of the mast underwater. And at that moment, I had a thought in my mind: if I open my hand, I was underwater. If I open my hand, I'll get separated from the boat, and I can end everything here. But I decided to, live on. When the boat straightened, I found myself on top of the mast, and my hand got stuck to a steel wire. So in my desperation, I was trying to release myself. I fell from the mast, roughly about 5 to 9 meters. I don't know how much. And I fell on an aluminum pole. And from there, I fell on the deck. And then I went inside. I was cleaning up the boat because, all the tools were everywhere. The charts were underwater. The cushions were stuck on the ceiling. Everything was a mess. So I tried to clean up everything. And finally, when I tried to stand up, I realized I couldn't stand up. My legs were not taking my weight. And that is when I realized something wrong with me. That's when I called for help.
How much of growing up in the Navy helped you in all this? How did your past in the Navy, your training? What came to your help at that time? Was it very tough?
It is tough. I mean, it is obviously very tough for a guy who's just come out of school. It's not just only tough; it is extremely senseless also. And it is so tough that in one of the interviews, I told everybody that, listen, what I experienced in those 40 hours, 72 hours in the middle of the Southern Ocean with a storm and a broken spine was nothing compared to one day's experience in the Naval Academy. It was senseless, extremely tough. But it's only after you go through that 3 years of training that you realize that all this is being done so that any situation doesn't, flabbergast you. You're ready for any situation. Sometimes somebody will take off your shirt and start singing. Oh, you're ready for that. It's no big deal. It's the simplest thing you can do. Somebody
while you're at the academy, you think that everything is stupid. Only when you come out, you realize, oh, well, it was too good.
Exactly. You've stretched to such limits that everything is normal now. And so that the storm, the accident, it was all normal. There's nothing.
Okay. Now, how was your recovery, from your character, which is, say, which circulates around indomitability. I suppose you came out stronger. And did you?
Of course, sir. I had 4 fractures in the spine, which I came to only 16 days after the accident, because I was shifted from my boat into an island, and from there to by a helicopter to a ship, and that ship came to India. And once it reached India, I had a MRI, and that's where I came to know that there were 4 fractures. Next day, I was flown to Delhi, 1 CT scan, and the day after that, on 7th or 8th of October, the doctor operated. He put 2 titanium rods, 8 screws, and he's fixed 5 bones into 1 piece. So definitely that piece is stronger than before. And I cannot have a slip disc. The operation happened. Next day, I was sedated. Day after that, started walking without support from anybody. I think 2 weeks later, I was discharged. Took a 2-month break, sick leave. 25th of November, I was back on duty. I did a lot of physiotherapy. Once physiotherapy was, showing its result, when I was able to walk, I was able to drive a car. I could walk without a crutch. I could sit without a crutch. These were big achievements for me. Once I was able to do that, I had to overcome, the muscle atrophy that happened. I went to a gym, started exercising with very light weights, 5 kilos and all. Then I had to overcome the fear of falling. I enrolled myself in a kickboxing class. Did kickboxing, then to increase core strength, I went into a Pilates class. All this while I took help from Ayurveda for, all the massages and all that. In 6 months from my discharge, the Navy certified me fit for sailing and fit for flying. And actually, fitness for flying is the highest level of fitness you can think of. Flying, diving, and submarines. I was declared fit for flying. I was declared fit for sailing. And within 1 year of the accident, I had done 50 kilometers of kayaking. And I won a sailing championship. And before I left the Navy, I made sure that I even, went up in the sky in an aircraft.
I was asked recently in a question, as to what does the Navy gain from adventure activities, and the instant answer that came to my tongue was, I told him that, look, the armed forces live in a great paradox. We are preparing for an exam all the time and praying all the time that the exam doesn't take place. So, and that when that exam comes, which is war, everyone in the service is supposed to rise up to, whatever heights required to get there. Because in a war, though failure is a possibility, it's not an option. So, so then I said that, but everyone can't be, testing themselves like that. You can't practice war, you see. So I said that some from among us are allowed to do things which are beyond human capability, so that it gives confidence to the entire constituency, that is the armed forces and the country, that when required, anyone in the armed forces can do such stuff. Now, do you agree with me? And what else is what were the gains that the Navy made from your trips?
Sir, I absolutely agree with this. I mean, there's no doubt. But at the same time, I want to add on to what you said. Now, for me, adventure is something with an unknown outcome. So the outcome is, not really guaranteed what will happen at the end of whatever you're trying to do. But the process, the things that you learn in the process is definitely guaranteed. The more people go to sea in sailboats in the Navy, they are expanding their, comfort level. They can lead a tougher life when they come back home on land. They're more comfortable on ships, etc. All those things are there. But there are certain other positives. There's certain other I don't know how to put it, but I'll give you a few examples. There was this guy, one officer in the Falkland Islands, 50s or 60s, I don't remember when. I came to know about him when I went to the Falklands. He used to take a sailboat and go to every island, every beach once a week, make some notes, come back, and people thought he was crazy. This crazy officer in a boat going to all these weird places, rocky terrain.
This is the 1960s, you said, correct?
60s or 70s, I don't know which year, but long back. He used to do that. He used to take his boat and, make these observations and come back. And everybody thought he was crazy. When the Falkland War happened, the Brits used his notes to recapture the islands. So obviously, I mean, people must have thought he is crazy, but there was a tangible benefit to what he did. Now, I was sent to Oman, to Salalah, to sail with Professor Radhakrishnan. Obviously, if you look at the cost involved and all that, there could be 1,000 questions asked. Why are you spending taxpayers' money like this, like that, etc., etc. But fact is, in that voyage, I made a stopover at Mukalla. Obviously, a lot of people have not heard of Mukalla. I made a stopover in Aden. And from there, I came back. 2 stops in Yemen, I came back. Many years later, Indians had to be evacuated. Indian citizens had to be evacuated from Yemen when civil war broke out. There were 3 ports chosen: Mukalla, Aden, and one more. And by luck, I was sitting in the operations room in Bombay. Okay, and nobody had gone to Mukalla before, but I was able to share my experience so that the ship could extract the people safely without any incident. So all these, learnings are put into play somewhere or the other. It's not like it's a totally, for fun or wasteful expenditure.
Yeah, what the Falklander did was a continuation of what happened from 1860s in the British Navy, where hydrographers came to the fore because their main focus was on finding more lands. That's why the Andaman Nicobar Islands and almost every nook and corner is named after them.
I mean, I want to add there is this very famous admiral called Fitzroy, who was doing survey of Tierra del Fuego, and he noticed some rocks or something, and he thought that next time I'll take a naturalist with me. He came back and gave an advertisement. One guy joined his ship. His ship's name was HMS Beagle. The Beagle went around the world, and the naturalist was Charles Darwin. Yeah. Okay, and you have the theory of evolution come from something that ideally should have been just another adventure. Fitzroy became such a famous admiral. He set up a institution of weather prediction, became such an important figure that there was a sea area which was named after him, and he's the only person after whom a sea area was named.
That reminds me, what happened to that young sailor called Alam, whom I attached to you when you came to Mandui?
Oh,
Alam, I think.
That's a very important part of my life. I'm glad you asked about Alam. Alam came on my boat. He was very hassled. Maybe because he saw me, crazy guy. I didn't know what was the reason, but he looked very hassled. And he said, "Sir, transfer me to Bombay." Why? Sir, I'll learn some sailing. I said, "You are supposed to help me here. You do exactly what I tell you. You don't need to learn to sail or something." And then he's like, "No, send me to Bombay." I thought, what sort of an idiot I have with me, and I don't know how I'm going to train him. But finally, after talking to him, I realized he had certain family issues which nobody could, sort out. And I helped him as much as I could. And then I discovered that this guy may not be an intellectual, but he's got 2 qualities which will take him to great heights. First, he was extremely honest. Second, he was extremely obedient. If something goes wrong, if some book got wet, he would own up and say, "Sir, I'm sorry, I left it there. It's my fault. It will not happen again." If I gave him a job, he will not leave till he finished that. These 2 attributes were, it really helped me and helped him as well. He was with me for roughly 2 years, preparing the boat, and I did the circumnavigation and all. But I was able to help him to such an extent that I taught him sailing, whatever I could. I took him with me to Malaysia, and he flew back from there. I got him I can't say I got him, but I recommended him for a Navy Chief Commendation, which is a really big thing. And he was awarded a Navy Chief Commendation for helping me with Sagar Parikrama. He got a promotion. He retired as a petty officer. His child got admission in a school that he wanted, in a convent school in Bihar. His wife got a government job. And I gifted him my laptop. He learned to operate a computer. So I'm really happy that, this guy, through his own efforts, has managed to do all these things.
That's quintessential Navy. The armed forces rather. Actually that relationship which we have among sailors and officers and jawans and all that. It's something which it cannot be perceived easily outside. Anyway, good. That nice to hear about Alum like that. Okay, now tell me, turning to something esoteric here. In your blog of the first trip of 27 May 2013, actually, I will read that. You write in a section titled "The Resurrection of Dragonflies." You write that by the time we were on the throes of crossing the equator for the second time, the sea had undergone a metamorphosis. The youthful, inquisitive, godless ocean of the south had grown older, wiser, and bored in its latitudes. Its faith reaffirmed by the repetitive act of washing the shores of the land of a million deities. Goodness. Now, this is high literature. Where does that come from? Is it reading from childhood? And how do you, handle those godless oceans?
Sir, I didn't write that.
Ah.
It was written by a guy who looked like me.
Uh-huh.
His name was Abhilash Tommy.
But the sea made you like that at that time.
I've left him behind in the sea. I have been a voracious reader as a child. And thanks to you, I managed to take a lot of books with me in my voyages. But reading has been my first hobby. And I've been, I read even a scrap of paper which is lying on a road. I don't know how I got the ability to express like this. It is possible that it is everything that I experience around me and the intense solitude, which helps you introspect and develop those thoughts, which made me write those lines.
How did you handle those godless oceans? Did you go to God?
As far as this, God figure is concerned, I had a realization that the God we pray to may not be the real God. I don't know how exactly to express this. So I started questioning the nature of God and the existence of God. There were many days where I was convinced that God did not exist. There were many days where I was convinced that God existed and life has a meaning, and that if God wants, He will bring me out of every storm and all that. And finally, there were many days where I was convinced that it doesn't matter whether God existed or not, because if God doesn't exist, my life is meaningless, and my death is also meaningless. If God exists, my life is meaningful, my death is meaningful, but everything is in the hands of God. Ultimately, all that is within me is to perceive things the way I want to perceive. I can see a storm with a lot of emotions of fear and, etc., or I could welcome it as an opportunity. So this is something that was in my hand. And that is that seminal change that happened when I got into the Southern Ocean. I learned how to control my reaction to things. I learned how to control my mind and the emotions that it produced.
You carry any relic with you for the conventional world as we left it?
Of course, I was expecting people would give me books to keep company for the voyage, but I went with I think 6 rosaries, a lot of many little statues of idols of Ganesha for good luck. And of course, there was this cross, which, you got from Israel and came and gave it to me. And I was very happy because I thought you were giving it to me. But
it's right here. It's right here in my hand.
That one.
Right here in my hand. The cross that went around the world with you. Yes, and like you said, it lies among the Ganeshas in my house.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
Anyway, do you remember a story? We were at near your boat in the boat pool in Mandvi when I needed a pen to write quickly, and you were around, and a couple of Marine commandos were around. You turned into your boat, and your Marine commando went running, and he managed to come with a pen. And then I told you, look, the Marine commando has beaten you. And you remember what you told me? You told me that as a yachtsman, I manufacture what I need. I don't go and fetch anything from anywhere. So tell me, how does that actually, what is the message to our listeners, from this thing about self-sufficiency, initiative, creativity?
message is if you sprinkle some good humor into a good excuse, people will buy it. I mean, it need not be that always your tire is punctured or your car broke down. But the thing is, the earth is like that. You have a finite amount of resources. Resources are not endless. And there will be many times when you'll have to use your ingenuity to manufacture things that you might need. Probably, that's what another big learning has been for me. 5 months, I was in this boat. I couldn't take anything from outside. It was like, the earth going around the sun with just that much of resources. I had to make do with whatever I had. In between, I ran out of water. I just had 15 liters of water for 15 days of sailing. And I still managed with 1 liter of water per day. I gathered some rainwater. I had another 10 liters. But, I started, I was going to the loo in seawater. I started taking bath in seawater. I started washing clothes, washing dishes in seawater, brushing my teeth in seawater, cleaning rice in seawater, soaking dal in seawater. I was able to reduce freshwater consumption to less than 1 liter per day. So I think that's a big learning.
Okay, I have only 2 more questions for you. Your dad, whom I have known for long, lives hardly 500 meters from where I'm sitting now. At Kandanad in Kochi. He's been a naval officer. You have been a naval kid. You've been in the Navy. You have been virtually the face of the Navy for many audiences after your adventures. And now I was amazed to see that after all that connection with the blue sky and the oceans, your wife's name is Urmimala, which means ocean, garland of waves, and you have one son at home with the name Vedant, which is end of knowledge, the knowledge of the Upanishads, and you have a son called Abranil, who is again the blue sky. So you have the oceans, the waves, and knowledge all in your house. Good enough for a circumnavigation inside your house. But where are you going next?
Outside for a circumnavigation. I'm planning to take part in the Golden Globe race 2022, sir. So that's the next big plan. And one big reason is it's unfinished business for me. I've rounded all the great caves except Cape Comorin. I want to round Cape Comorin at 40 degrees south. That's what I will do next time. And I hope I can finish it and finish with some good standing.
On this, since it is the 72nd Republic Day, I suppose, your parents' wedding anniversary, you said, no?
Yes, I remember. I need to call them and wish them.
I think I'll reach them faster than you. Do you have a message for our listeners on this Republic Day?
The only thing I've learned, or the biggest learning from my life, is that you need to slowly expand your comfort area. You do that by taking small incremental risks, and eventually, even parents should let their children take those little risks, so that by the time they are 40 or something, their life will be very well settled, even if they don't have anything. They will be able to take big risks. They'll be able to achieve extremely big failures of which they can be very proud of. And they will even have, much bigger successes that you can enjoy for the rest of your life.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure talking to you. You know that, spending an evening chatting with you. We don't have the sea breeze in our faces like we used to have in the boat pool at Mandvi. But then everything else is insignificant when it's a chat with you. Since though we have, I think we have exceeded our time. So, but I think I'll still take 2 questions from the audience. I'll just look for them. Huh? Yeah, Anjali, please ask.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
So, sir, I have heard a lot about Abhilash, sir, and I'm so privileged to be here, sir. So you have so far traveled the whole world and gained the title, the first Indian to sail solo around the world non-stop, around the globe. So, sir, I want to ask you that, did anything distracted you from this journey? At any stage of your journey, did you thought that I shouldn't have taken such a decision. I shouldn't have. This journey was not necessary. Anything distracted you, sir? And if anything distracted you, what were those distractions, and how did you overcome that, sir?
Well, thanks for this question. But the thing is, the answer is very simple. I never asked myself why I, embarked on this voyage. I was always very happy, comfortable doing this circumnavigation. Even at that moment when my spine was fractured, my boat was about to sink. I knew that I'm going to lose my boat. My bank balance was in minus crores, and I was not even sure if I'll be able to walk ever or will I become paralyzed. Even in that moment, I did not have any regrets. I never asked myself why I got into this. I thought, there was a moment when I thought I should cry, but I ended up laughing at my fate. I couldn't cry. So the answer is no. I'm so focused that I don't have distractions. After spending 82 days alone, the concept of death stops existing for you. When you're on land, your life is defined by your relationship with people around you. You have a father, you are a father to somebody, you got a wife, you got, a boss, you got juniors, you got people working for you, you are working for somebody else. You got so many relationships that it defines you. Now, if you cut off all those relationships, what are you? You reach a stage where death itself stops having meaning. And if somebody told me you're going to die tomorrow, it would have been a very blank statement, So I was never really worried about death, to be honest.
Okay, I will wind up. This is for all the listeners. Actually, there are too many things have been spoken in this 1 hour session that it is impossible to imbibe everything by that first primary listening. So my advice to all the youngsters who are hearing this is that you must hear this recording again and again, because there are too many things have been told about a very special person, B, about a very special environment from which that person emanated. There are too many things to learn, and I strongly recommend that you hear it again and again to get the best lessons out of it. I thank all our listeners and Cube's Career Care for arranging this event. Thank you very much. Thank you, Abhilash. Meet you soon. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir.